A dog was seen digging in the snow. What he uncovered stopped the town cold. No one noticed him at first, a lone German shepherd, covered in soot and frost, padding silently through the forest's edge. His paws were cracked, his breath short, but still he dug. Not out of hunger, not for shelter. He dug because something fragile was buried beneath the drift. That morning the snow hadn't stopped falling, and neither had the quiet. Grace thought she'd only find tracks. Instead, she found a life. A newborn, barely breathing, wrapped in nothing but snow and silence. Beside her the dog sat, not wagging, not whining, just waiting, watching. What follows isn't just a rescue, it's a trail of memory, grief, and instinct. It's the unraveling of a bond long buried beneath ash and time. And it begins with the one who remembered, when everyone else forgot. Snow slants sideways across the windshield like ghost-white arrows, hurling through the dark at 30 miles an hour. The defroster whines but loses ground by the second, a pale film of frost slowly reclaiming the corners of glass. Grace Delaney tightens her grip on the wheel, the ridges of her knuckles stark beneath the glow of the dashboard. Her eyes are sharp but tired, like someone who's stared too long at silence. The road to Sable Ridge has vanished under a blanket of white, unmarked by tire or print, just pine trees thick with ice, leaning over as if trying to whisper warnings through the roar of wind. "Still nothing from dispatch?" Grace's voice is low, almost swallowed by the heater fan. Ben Ortega, riding shotgun in a thick brown parka, frowns as he adjusts the frequency. His face is calm, but a twitch in his jaw betrays the tension. Just coordinates, no follow-up, no return call. Cell ping says it came from north of Hollow Creek. That's as specific as we've got. Grace exhales through her nose. That's great. Coordinates with no voice, those always end well. Ben gives her a sideways look. Could be a stranded car. Could be someone panicked. We've had worse. She doesn't reply. Her jaw works against itself, teeth clenched tight as she leans forward, trying to read the road beyond the beams of the headlights. Snow peels in sheets against the glass. Her fingers adjust the wiper speed even though they're already maxed. She doesn't like uncertainty. Doesn't like the quiet calls. Those ones that hum just beneath the skin, like a note in a key only your bones can hear. The kind that whisper, "You'll remember this one." Grace had once been radiant. At least that's what people used to say. Before her sister drowned in the Quarry Lake the summer she turned 26. Before the fire that took the last of their family home. Before grief settled into her like fog in a valley, quiet, low, and permanent. Now at 34 she carries herself like a sealed envelope. No edges to pry, no address to return to. The silence stretches. Then, Ben says, "Grace, you okay?" She blinks. "Yeah, just trying not to drive us into a ravine." "Fair," he says softly, then leans back into his seat. The radio crackles again, just static. The ambulance groans as it climbs a shallow incline. Ice crusts the side mirrors. Pines bend above them like frozen sentries. Grace's breath clouds the interior. Her coffee from earlier sits untouched in the console, long gone cold. The night has a strange pulse, like it's waiting. Then Ben says, "Did you hear that?" Grace tilts her head. "Hear what?" He adjusts the volume. A faint click, then silence. Then, just for a second, a sound. Not static, not a voice. A breath, a gasp, then gone. He rewinds, replays. Nothing. "I'm telling you," Ben says. "It sounded like what?" "A baby." Grace stills. A moment passes. Then the GPS pings. The coordinates they were sent blink bright blue, a curve just ahead. The road narrows. Then, the headlights catch something. At first it's just a shape in the snow, a shadow against white. But as they approach, it solidifies. A dog, large, still, standing dead center in the lane. "Jesus," Ben mutters, sitting forward. "What is that, a coyote?" "No," Grace says, her voice strange. Her foot lifts from the pedal. "That's a shepherd." Snow fell in thick, angry spirals, wrapping the world in white silence. The ambulance idled in the middle of the road, headlights casting harsh gold against the blizzard. And there, in the center of that cone of light, stood the dog. Not a blur, not a mirage. Real. Large, black and tan, coated in frost and still as a statue. Grace leaned forward, her breath fogging the windshield. "It hasn't moved." Ben craned his neck. "Maybe it's frozen." But they both knew better. The dog's body was alert, not stiff. His ears stood tall, sharp silhouettes against the storm. His tail hung low, not tucked, not wagging. He stared directly into the headlights, unblinking, unafraid, like he'd been waiting for them. Ben sighed, flicked the high beams. "Go on. Move, boy." Nothing. Then he rolled the window down halfway and shouted over the wind. "Hey! Get off the road." Still, the dog didn't twitch, didn't bark, didn't blink, just stared. Grace shifted the ambulance into park. Ben looked at her. "Don't." But she was already reaching for the door handle. "Grace," he said more firmly, deliberately, then stopped. 10 feet of road separated them. Grace could hear her heart louder than the storm. She crouched slightly, palm out. "Hey there," she said, her voice barely carrying. "You okay?" The dog tilted his head, just a little, enough to register presence, intelligence. He made a sound then, not a bark, a low, thin whine, quiet, like something being remembered. Ben's boots landed behind her with a reluctant stomp. "This is insane. He could be rabid." Grace shook her head. "No, look at him." Ben squinted through the snow. "You think he's wild?" "I think he's working." The words felt strange in her mouth, but they hung there, true. This wasn't a random encounter. The dog wasn't here by accident. His eyes met hers, not curious, not scared, but deliberate, like he needed her to see him. The wind howled again, lifting a drift of snow that curled around the dog's legs. He didn't flinch. Grace took another step forward, and the dog took one back. Still slow, still calm. Then he turned, not fully, just enough for her to see the line of his shoulder and the start of a trail leading off the road. Fresh paw prints in the snow. "Ben," she said without looking away, "grab the med bag and the flashlight." Ben muttered something under his breath, but turned back toward the ambulance. Grace moved forward, her boots crunching into snow. The dog paused, looked back, then continued down the embankment beside the road, each step precise, like he knew where not to step. By the time Ben caught up with the light, the dog had already slipped between the trees. Grace didn't hesitate, she followed. Branches heavy with snow arched above them, forming a silent tunnel through the woods. The flashlight beam danced across trunks and drifts and shadows, never quite catching the dog full on. But the prints were there, unmistakable, veering gently downward. "Tell me again why we're following a damn dog into the woods during a blizzard," Ben said, panting. Grace answered without turning. "Because he's not just a dog." "What is he then, a snow spirit?" "No, he's pointing." Ben fell quiet after that, maybe because he knew she was right, or maybe because something in the air had shifted, some tension that buzzed just beneath the howling wind, something old and aching that made you tread more softly. They reached a small clearing. The dog stood at the far edge, unmoving. The snow here had sunken inward, a shallow bowl of white, oddly shaped, too symmetrical to be natural. Grace's breath hitched. "There," she whispered. "He led us here." Ben swept the flashlight around. "What is this place?" Then the dog did something new. He circled the depression once, then sat just outside it, watching, waiting, like he had done his part. Grace stepped forward, her body taut with cold and anticipation. The wind shrieked through. Felt wrong. Off. She knelt and started to dig. The snow had settled here in a way that felt intentional, like it had been folded in, not fallen. Grace's knees pressed into the frozen crust as she scraped at the surface with gloved hands. The crust broke reluctantly, resisting her fingers like the ground itself didn't want to give up what it held. Ben knelt beside her, flashlight clenched between his teeth, as he used both hands to help dig. Their breath came fast in clouds, merging with the steam from their bodies in the frozen air. The German shepherd sat a few feet away, outside the shallow dip, unmoving, not pacing, not panting, watching, silent, waiting. "What is this?" Ben muttered, squinting into the growing pit. "Something's buried here," Grace said, her voice tight. "Not deep, but it's not snowpack." She clawed faster, hands numb now, not caring. The wind shrieked through the trees behind them, pulling at the edges of her coat. She didn't notice, not until her knuckles struck something soft. Fabric. She froze. Ben saw it too. "Hold on, don't pull it yet." They cleared more snow. It wasn't a sleeping bag, not even a blanket. Just an old, weather-worn jacket. Army green, torn at one sleeve. Dusty with snow. Then Grace saw it, a flash of pink. Her heart stuttered. "Ben!" "I see it." She yanked at the fabric, with a kind of desperation that lived beneath words. Her gloves slipped. She tore them off and dug with bare fingers, biting her lip against the sting of ice. And then a hand, tiny, pale. Fingers curled inward like a dying flower. Ben dropped the flashlight. "God!" Grace's breath caught in her throat. She reached in and pulled the bundle gently into her lap, peeling back the jacket's folds with shaking hands. A baby, newborn, weeks old at most, wrapped in a torn flannel shirt, snowmelt seeping into every fiber. Her lips were tinged blue, skin waxy. But her chest, it rose, just barely. "She's breathing," Grace gasped. "Ben, she's alive." "Are you sure?" "She's breathing. Get the pediatric kit, now!" Ben scrambled to his feet, half running back toward the ambulance, boots punching into the snow. Grace cradled the baby against her chest, her own coat already open. She yanked it off and wrapped, relieved. Just present, grounded in the now. Minutes blurred into one another. The wind pressed harder through the trees, lifting flurries into the sky like ash. The world contracted down to that tiny chest, to the heat, or lack of it, beneath Grace's hands. She kept whispering, not prayers, not orders, just sound. Anything to keep the moment from going silent again. Then Ben's voice echoed behind her. "I've got it! Oxygen, heat pack, blanket, we need to warm her slow, no shock." Grace nodded, but her focus never left the child. Ben knelt again, working beside her in quiet precision. They wrapped the warm packs around the baby's tiny feet and ribs, careful not to overstimulate. The heater pack hissed softly between their hands. "She's going to make it," Grace whispered. "She has to." They bundled her carefully, sealed her against the cold, and cradled her between them as they climbed the slope. Before turning back, Grace looked one more time at the shepherd. He hadn't moved. He just sat in the snow, like a marker, like a memory. "Come on," Grace called, her voice nearly lost to the wind. The dog didn't follow, didn't retreat either. He just watched them go. Back at the road, the ambulance looked like a ghost, frost climbing its windows, lights dimmed behind layers of snow. Ben slid the side door open and Grace climbed in with the baby still pressed to her chest. They secured the bundle, checked vitals, wrapped, checked again. The child's eyes fluttered, just once, and that was enough. Grace leaned back, her parka soaked, hands raw, eyes wide with something that had no name. She looked through the windshield. The shepherd was gone. No paw prints, no shadow, just snow, falling soft again now, as if the storm itself had finished speaking. The lights of Willow Outpost broke through the curtain of snow like a promise barely kept. A small building no bigger than a farmhouse, its windows steamed and flickering with generator-fed warmth. Grace steered the ambulance into the clearing, tires crunching through ice-encrusted slush as the storm began to loosen its grip on the night. She didn't take her eyes off the baby, even as Ben jumped out to bang on the clinic door, even as the wind shrieked around them like something wounded and dying. Grace sat hunched over the bundle in her lap, cradling it as if the child were the last spark in a dying world. The infant's skin was no longer the blue of the grave, but not yet flushed with life. Her tiny mouth twitched once, instinctive. Her fingers, still curled inward, rested against Grace's jacket like question marks. The clinic door opened with a burst of light and breathless urgency. "Get her in," a voice called, sharp, firm, undeniably in charge. Decades in rural medicine. Creases not just of age, but of care worn deep. Grace climbed out carefully, baby pressed to her. No one spoke as they entered, just the hurried rhythm of steps over tile, the squeak of boots, and the low whir of a wall heater struggling against the cold. The clinic smelled of antiseptic, coffee left too long in the pot, and something more tender, wool, cedar, and home. "This way," Dr. Quinn motioned, pushing open the door to a small exam room. Ben laid out the heat wraps, oxygen mask, and the portable warmer in seconds. He was calm now, focused, like something sacred had been placed in his hands, and all the sarcasm had melted with the snow. Grace peeled back her coat and layers with gentle fingers, afraid that too much touch might undo something fragile. The baby stirred again. A faint sound escaped her lips. Not a cry, but the breath before one. Dr. Quinn leaned in with a stethoscope. "Lungs are tight, heart slow but consistent, controlled warming. We do this wrong, we lose her." "She was buried under snow," Grace said quietly, watching the doctor's every move. "Wrapped in someone's jacket. It wasn't random. Someone placed her there." Quinn gave her a sharp look. "How'd you find her?" Ben glanced at Grace, then answered for them. "A dog, shepherd, led us to her." "A dog?" Quinn asked, not dismissively, but with a raised brow. "He just stood in the middle of the road," Grace said. "Didn't bark, didn't move, waited, then walked. We followed." Dr. Quinn nodded once, then turned back to the baby. "I've seen stranger things out here." As they worked, Grace noticed something glinting beneath the folds of the damp flannel. She reached in carefully and lifted a small, plastic band. A hospital bracelet, faded, nearly rubbed smooth by cold and time. But the ink was still legible. Isla. That one word carved a deep line through Grace's chest. She stared at it for a long second, like the name itself was breathing. "She has a name," Grace whispered. Ben leaned in. "Isla?" Grace nodded. "She's not just a rescue. She's someone." The room fell into a hush. Even the wind outside seemed to still for a moment. They placed Isla into the warming bassinet, her vitals monitored on a small flickering screen. Her body, wrapped now in fresh blankets and heat packs, wrapped her arms around herself, staring into the dark, as if the shadows might part and give her something back. "He waited for us," she said quietly, like he knew. Ben didn't argue. He handed her a cup. Then he left when the job was done. Grace stared out into the snow for a long time before turning back inside. The warmth hit her like a soft slap, jarring but welcome. She walked down the corridor and stopped outside the exam room. Through the glass, she watched Dr. Quinn adjusting a monitor, gently repositioning Isla's blanket. The baby looked like any other now. Breathing. Real. Herself. Isla. A name the storm hadn't taken. Grace touched the window, her hand flat against the glass. Then she whispered, almost to no one at all, "Thank you." Grace sat alone in the clinic break room, her hands wrapped around a chipped mug of tea that had gone lukewarm. The storm had finally passed, leaving behind a silence so deep it pressed against the windows like fog. The kind of silence that arrives only after something important has been taken or returned. Outside, the last light of morning crept across the pines, fragile and pale. Inside, the only sound was the hum of the heater trying to convince the old walls to hold warmth. Isla was stable. That truth alone had changed everything. Grace glanced at her phone on the table. She had posted the photo an hour ago, nothing fancy. Just the image she'd snapped on instinct before stepping into the ambulance. The hollow in the snow, the jacket half buried, the faint outline of a paw print at the edge of the frame. And in the corner, blurry but visible, the shepherd's silhouette as he turned toward the woods. Her caption had been simple. "Found near Hollow Creek. German shepherd led us to an abandoned infant. Does anyone recognize this dog?" At first, there was nothing. Then a few likes. A share. Then the inbox lit up like a fuse had been struck. Grace tapped into the message feed with slow fingers. Dozens, now more than 50, new messages. Some from locals, some from towns further out. Bozeman, Laurel, even a woman in Kalispell. "Looks like the same dog I saw near the old railway last winter." That can't be the same shepherd from the Ridge Trail, can it? My grandfather swears a dog like that shows up near lost hikers. One comment made her sit straighter. "That's Ash. I'm sure of it. He used to belong to Tyler Grant. Ridgefire, 2020. Grace blinked. The message came from a woman named Heather Stokes, profile marked as a retired dispatcher out of Helena. Attached to the message was a photo from an old rescue team newsletter. A young man, late 20s, dark hair and an earnest grin, standing beside a large German shepherd in a red harness. Name hit her chest like the backdraft from an old memory. More messages flooded in. "That's the K9 from the Ridge Fire, right? He went missing after his handler died saving those hikers. Some say he wouldn't leave the site. We thought he died out there." Grace read through them slowly, absorbing each one like a puzzle piece she didn't yet know how to place. Somewhere between gratitude and grief, awe and ache. The story of Ash began to take shape. Tyler Grant, a name she didn't recognize, but one that clearly meant something to many in the community. Ben walked into the break room, rubbing his hands together. "Coffee's finally kicking in. Quinn says the baby's vitals are holding, temps rising on track." Grace looked up. "She has a name." He nodded. "Isla, I saw the bracelet." She turned the screen toward him. Someone recognized the dog. Ben squinted at the photo, then scrolled through the messages. His brow furrowed deeper with each one. Ash, former K9, Ridge Fire. Wait, Tyler Grant? Grace nodded. Handler. Died saving hikers. The dog ran off after the funeral, never seen again. Until now. Ben leaned against the counter, the weight of realization settling in. "So you're saying the dog that saved that baby is the same one that vanished 3 years ago?" "That's what people are saying. They think he's been showing up, quietly, at accident sites, near missing persons. Never long enough to catch, always gone before anyone can get close." Ben exhaled. "Like a ghost with a badge." Grace looked down at the phone again, the photo frozen on that moment, the blur of a shepherd's shape retreating into snow. Something in her stirred. Not fear, not even wonder. Recognition. Not of the dog, but of the feeling. The way silence wraps around a wound. The way some things don't need language to be understood. "He waited," she said softly, "stood in the middle of the road until we saw him. Then he led us." Ben didn't reply right away. Then, "That's not instinct." "No," she said. "It's memory." The kettle clicked off in the corner. Neither of them moved to pour. Grace opened a new tab, her fingers hesitant on the keys. She searched Tyler Grant, Ridgefire, Montana, 2020. The results came quickly. News clippings, a memorial video, a headline from a local paper, "Firefighter dies saving 2. K9, his name is Ash. He used to belong to Tyler Grant. I was on his deployment rotation. Please message me." Grace blinked at the name, the words curling around something in her memory. Ivy Lang. She'd seen it before. In a case file? A training manual? No, an article years ago. Wilderness responder, decorated, retired early after a rockslide injury, known for her work in backcountry rescue, with both canines and raptors. Grace clicked on the profile. The woman in the photo stood beside a juvenile great-horned owl, perched on her gloved wrist. Her face was weathered, eyes the pale green of lichen, gray braid draped over a faded ranger jacket. Her expression was the kind that didn't ask for trust, but earned it just by being still. Grace sent a message. "Hi, Ivy, this is Grace Delaney. I found the baby. I think your message might be right. Do you have time to talk?" The reply came almost instantly. "Yes, tonight, if you're still awake." Grace hesitated only a second, then typed, "Call me." Her phone rang less than a minute later. No video, just voice. The sound that answered was warm, grounded, a little scratchy like gravel soaked in sunlight. "I'm glad you reached out," Ivy said. "You're the one from Hollow Creek?" Yes, I'm the medic, my partner and I, Ben. We found her because of the dog. We wouldn't have seen her otherwise. There was a pause, then. That sounds like Ash. Grace exhaled. Everyone's saying that he's been seen before, that he shows up. He doesn't show up, Ivy said gently. He waits. Grace closed her eyes for a moment, letting that sink in. I was there, Ivy continued, when Tyler died. Ridge Fire, 2020. I wasn't with his direct squad, but I was on the ridgeline when the wind turned. He saved 2 hikers by getting them below the fire line, but a beam collapsed before he could make it back out. The other team found his body. Grace listened in silence. There was something in Ivy's voice, not mourning, not even memory, something quieter, like reverence. They sedated Ash, Ivy said, her voice almost breaking on the edges. He wouldn't leave Tyler's body. Laid beside him for hours. When we tried to move him, he growled. Didn't snap, didn't lunge, just mourned. Grace swallowed. What happened after? He was reassigned to a temporary handler. I tried to take him myself, but by then I was already being rotated out. Knee injury, desk bones and instinct. Even then, there was something different. In what way? Ivy paused. Then, most dogs follow voice, command, repetition. Ash followed intention. Grace furrowed her brow. What does that mean? He didn't wait to be told. He read people, felt for patterns. If a child was scared but silent, Ash would be the one who found them first. If a trail went cold, Ash was the one who pivoted before the rest of us even realized the wind had shifted. A beat. He wasn't just trained. He believed in the work. Grace felt her throat tighten. And now, Ivy said softly, he's still doing it. Even without orders, even without a handler. Grace's voice came out quieter than she expected. Why would he help a stranger? Because to Ash, no one is a stranger once they cry. The line went quiet then, not dead, just still. Grace wiped at the corner of her eye. Would you be willing to come out here, meet me, see her? Ivy didn't hesitate. Yes, just say when. Tomorrow, Grace said. Morning. We'll be here at Willow Outpost. Ask for me at the front. I'll bring what I have, Ivy said. Photos, records, what's left. As the call ended, Grace sat for a while in the dark. She wasn't religious, never had been. But that night, something about the way Ivy spoke, the quiet conviction, the clarity, made her believe in something again. Not in fate, but in memory, and in a dog who remembered when no one else did. Morning in Sable Ridge didn't arrive with light. It came with stillness, the kind that presses gently against the windows like a hand asking for permission to enter. Snow coated the pine boughs in soft silence, and smoke curled upward from the clinic's old chimney, gray against a pale sky. Grace stood at the front desk of Willow Outpost, hands wrapped around a thermos that had long stopped steaming. Her gaze was distant, fixed on nothing. The night had left her hollowed but alert, like a candle burned low, but not yet out. Behind her, Isla slept soundly in the nursery, tiny chest rising and falling beneath warm blankets. Her color had returned overnight. She had even stirred once, wrinkling her nose as if disagreeing with the world's chill. The bell over the front door chimed gently. Grace turned. Ivy Lang stepped in with the wind still clinging to her coat. She was exactly as she looked, motioning toward the bag. "You said the baby's stable?" "Resting," Grace replied. "She's stronger today, warmer, pink in the cheeks." Ivy exhaled through her nose, something unreadable flickering across her face. Relief, maybe, or memory. "Let's sit," Grace offered, leading her into the small break room near the back. It smelled faintly of disinfectant and cinnamon tea. The walls held a corkboard with faded flyers, search and rescue notices, vaccination reminders, a missing cat from last summer. Ivy pulled out a manila folder from the bag and laid it on the table. "This is what I have left." Inside were photographs, age documents, and 2 laminated ID tags. Grace reached for a photo on top. Tyler Grant smiled back at her from beneath a fire helmet, arm draped casually around a German shepherd in a red harness. The dog's ears were alert, his mouth slightly open, tongue lolling, not in excitement, but readiness. Ash. There was something steady in his expression. No tricks, no performative charm, just focus. "He's beautiful," Grace said softly. "He was always like that," Ivy replied. "Even as a pup, alert, serious. It used to make the trainers nervous." Grace looked up. "They thought he might be too intense," Ivy continued. "Didn't respond to toys, barely reacted to treats, but give him a task, real work, and he locked in like nothing else mattered." She pulled out another photo. Ash in a classroom setting, lying beside an infant mannequin, eyes fixed on the trainer. "We trained him for infant search and rescue, unusual but not unheard of. He could distinguish between different types of cries, fear, hunger, distress. He was most drawn to the newborns." Grace raised an eyebrow. "He used to sleep beside the cribs during drills," Ivy added. "No command. He just positioned himself there, like he thought that's where he was most needed." A long silence settled between them. Grace turned over one of the laminated tags. K9, Ash, Handler, Tyler Grant, Unit, Ridge, S&R. Underneath, Certified Wilderness, Avalanche, Infant Search, Thermal Displacement Response. "And after Tyler died?" Grace asked, already knowing the answer. Ivy looked away for a beat. Ash wouldn't leave his body. The responders had to sedate him just to move him. Even then, when he woke up, he howled. Not a dog's howl either. It sounded wrong, like grief trying to form words. Grace set the photo down, slowly. He wasn't done. Grace stared at the photo again. "And now he's back saving a child?" "No," Ivy said quietly. "He never left. He was just waiting for the next soul that needed him." A lump rose in Grace's throat. She didn't speak right away. Then, "There's something else. When we followed him into the woods, when we found Ela, he didn't bark, didn't run. He moved like he'd done it before." Ivy nodded, because he had. Maybe not that exact place, but the ritual of rescue? That's etched into him. You can't train that out, especially not a dog like Ash. Grace sat back, the photo still in her hand. The air around her felt heavier now, not oppressive but full of meaning. like something long buried had finally surfaced. And yet, she murmured, no one's claimed him. No one even knew he was still out there. Ivy's eyes didn't blink. Some ghosts don't want to be found, but they show up when it matters. The wind had started changing direction by late afternoon, Ivy said. She remembered the moment like it had never left her. The way it didn't howl or scream at first, but whispered low through the tree line, like something alive had drawn breath and exhaled across the mountain. It was supposed to be a containment mission, Ivy began, her voice measured. The ridge fire had already burned 37 acres. Tyler's unit was assigned to the north perimeter, mostly mop-up, redirecting runoff, keeping the fuel lines from jumping. She sat across from Grace in the small break room, the folder of old photos open on the table between them. Her eyes, the color of pine bark and old smoke, stared somewhere beyond the room, as if replaying the sequence frame by frame. I wasn't with his team, Ivy continued, but I was on overwatch, watching wind patterns, spotting for flare-ups. I saw the shift too late. Grace didn't interrupt. The clock on the wall ticked faintly behind them, a soft metronome against memory. They were near the ranger shelter, a small wooden lookout that hadn't been used in years. Tyler and Ash were searching the upper path for signs of hikers who hadn't checked back in. Two women, both in their 20s, stubborn types, ignored evacuation orders to get photos. Ivy shook her head faintly. He found them near a washout, cornered by fire on both sides. The smoke was so thick the chopper couldn't even see them from above. Ash located them first, she said. That's what the girls told us later. He didn't bark, just appeared out of the smoke, walked in, turned, and waited until they followed. Led them out the way he came. Grace said nothing, just listened, her hand resting gently on the old photo of Tyler in uniform. His face was young, but weathered, kind in the way some people are only after seeing enough sorrow to respect silence. Slid forward a photo. It had been taken after the fire, aerial view. Blackened tree stumps, the collapsed skeleton of a shelter, roof gone, beams warped into crooked ribs. He went back, Ivy said. There was a call from another team. A flare-up. Someone thought they saw movement. Tyler went to confirm. Alone. Ash followed him. The words came slower now. He radioed in that there was no one else, just a small fire. But a gust came through the valley. The beam load shifted. By the time the others got there, the roof had caved. They found him pinned beneath the support frame. Ivy's jaw tightened. And Ash, she didn't finish it right away, was lying across Tyler's chest, not moving, covered in ash and soot but not injured. Refused to leave. Growled when they came close. Whined like he was begging someone to wake up. Grace felt something constrict in her chest. They waited hours, Ivy said. Sent in a sedative through the dart gun. It took 2 rounds to bring him down. He fought it with everything he had. She reached into the folder again and pulled out a small, torn piece of harness. The corner of a patch. Black nylon frayed at the edge. It was sewn into his gear, Ivy murmured. Tyler always said, Ash earned it. Grace took it gently in her hands. The stitching had long since faded, but the letters were still there. Serve still. A variation of the standard motto Tyler had adapted for Ash. After a long silence, Ivy spoke again. They assigned Ash to a temp handler afterward, tried to ease him back into routine, but he didn't adjust. Wouldn't eat, wouldn't sleep indoors. Slept curled beside a heater vent. Paused twitching, always listening. Her voice lowered. 3 days later he was gone. Slipped the gate. No fence was broken. No prints leading out. He just disappeared. Grace looked up from the patch. And no one's seen him since? Not officially. No confirmed sightings. But, Ivy exhaled. Stories started to surface. Hikers who were found without knowing who led them back. Footprints in snow beside the lost. Children rescued from broken cars with no adult near. Always just out of frame. Always gone before anyone could thank him. Grace's eyes were glassed with quiet disbelief. And no one tried to find him. They did, but some things don't want to be caught. Ash wasn't running away. He was still working, just no longer answering to humans. The room fell still. Grace looked back at the photo of the burn shelter, then at the photo of Ash, standing beside Tyler with that steady, unwavering gaze. "Why now?" she asked quietly. That followed. She felt it again. That presence. Not the weight of the fire, but the echo of someone who'd walked through it and never stopped looking back. The snow had begun to fall again by late morning, softer this time, like the sky had grown tired of screaming and now only whispered. Beyond the frost-laced windows of Willow Outpost, pines bowed gently under the weight of the storm's afterthought, their shadows long and quiet against the hillside. Grace sat by the nursery window, her eyes tracing the slow, steady rise of Isla's chest beneath a bundle of soft wool. The baby lay in the same warmed bassinet where she'd been placed the night before, breathing deeper now, cheeks tinged with life. Inside the room it was warm, still. But Grace felt the wind of a story much larger than herself. Behind her, Ivy's voice lingered in the air. "Some dogs lose their purpose when the leash is gone," she'd said earlier. But not Ash. He wasn't made to wait for orders. He was made to listen for silence. Grace turned slightly in her chair. "Silence?" Ivy nodded from her place at the break room table, the folder still splayed open before her, like an old wound, made neat. The kind you don't notice until it's too late. The kind that follows a mother's scream that never made it past the trees. A baby's cry that no one else heard. She looked up, her eyes steady. Ash waited for that kind of call. Grace leaned back, fingers tightening around her thermos. 3 years? And he never stopped? No, Ivy said. He just kept looking. Not for a person, not for a home, for a reason. Grace didn't respond right away. Her gaze drifted to the hallway beyond the window, where shadows stretched toward the entrance like footprints, long faded. Her voice, when it came, was quiet. And he found it. "I think he did," Ivy said. The words settled into the room like snowfall, light but unshakable. Grace reached forward and touched the old photo of Ash again. Her thumb grazed the glossy surface, pausing over the faint white blaze on his chin, the same mark she remembered seeing through the ambulance's windshield that night. She had called him a stray, a wanderer, but now she realized how wrong that was. He wasn't lost. He was working. Still. What do you call a soul that keeps showing up after everyone's stopped asking? Grace murmured. Ivy looked at her with something close to a smile, though it never quite touched her lips. A shepherd, she said. Grace exhaled. The light, like a breath, returned. And then, just beyond the tree line, she saw it. Not movement, not shadow, but presence. A faint imprint in the snow. Paw prints. Not new, not deep, but there. Grace pressed her palm to the glass, her heart moving with a rhythm she hadn't felt in years. "You think he's still out there now?" she asked. Ivy didn't have to look. He always is. Grace thought about the moment Ash had stopped in the road, how he hadn't barked, hadn't begged, just stood, steady, eyes on hers like a soldier reporting for duty. And she, too broken to believe in miracles, had hesitated, until she saw him turn, asking, silently, to be followed. She closed her eyes. "He didn't save her by accident," she said. "No," Ivy agreed. "He answered a call, one only he could hear." Grace opened her eyes again, and something in her vision had shifted. Ash wasn't a ghost. He wasn't a mystery. He was memory with a heartbeat, and for the first time in 3 years, someone had followed him back into the woods. The forest felt different now. Not safer, not louder, but known. Grace stepped over a sunken patch of snow just off the road, her boots landing where she remembered first hearing the whimper. Soft as breath, buried in wind. The trees around her still leaned inward, shoulders hunched beneath coats of frost, but their silence felt less ominous this time. More like reverence. She glanced back. Ben followed behind her, flashlight clipped to his vest, though it was daylight now, and Ivy walked just behind him, with a steadiness that came from years of trusting terrain like this. Her cane poked gently into the crust, measuring each step more by feel than sight. They moved quietly, like stepping back into a memory. And in a way, they were. The snow hadn't fully receded, but the storm's grip had weakened. Patches of exposed earth peeked through the melt, dark brown and glistening beneath the low sunlight. Pine needles clung to the drifts. Footprints from that night were long gone, erased by wind and time. But the shape was still there. At the edge of a shallow rise, beneath a crooked spruce, the snow curved unnaturally. A hollow, a cradle. Grace stopped. "This is it," she said quietly. Ivy stepped beside her. She didn't speak right away. She crouched, slowly, one hand brushing against the edge of the hollow, her fingers trailing over the snow, like she was reading Braille from the forest floor. She nodded to herself, then looked up. He insulated her. Ben frowned. "What do you mean?" "This isn't a random dip," Ivy said. "Beneath the snow, like bedding." Ben let out a slow whistle. "So he didn't just find her. He built this?" Ivy nodded once. "He didn't stumble across her. He made a den." Grace knelt beside the hollow, her hand brushing the inner curve of the nest. The earth was still cold, but not lifeless. A thin layer of pine sap clung to her glove. "She wasn't hypothermic when we found her," Grace whispered. "She was cold, but not frozen." "That's why," Ivy murmured. "He didn't just save her, he kept her alive." Ben glanced toward the tree line, the weight of the moment settling in. "But how'd he get her here? From the road?" They were quiet. Then Ivy said, "He carried her." The words hit Grace in the chest like the wind from a door flung open. "No blood, no tearing, no scratch marks on her arms," Ivy went on. "Just dirt on the sleeves and a flannel shirt wrapped around her like a wrap sling. He moved her gently, with purpose." Grace swallowed hard. Her eyes drifted over the hollow again, and suddenly it wasn't just a scene of survival. It was a vigil, a prayer dug into snow and bark and pine. She looked back at Ivy. Why bring her here? Not just to hide her. Why this spot? Ivy stood brushing her gloves. "Because it's sheltered, south-facing, minimal wind exposure. A dog trained in backcountry search would know how to read that. But more than that," her eyes softened, "because this is where he felt safe." Grace turned toward the trees beyond the clearing. They curved gently downhill, toward the fire line, toward memory. Ash brought her here because this place mattered to him, Ivy continued. Maybe it's close to where Tyler died. Maybe it's just where he stayed since. But this, she gestured toward the hollow, this wasn't random. This was instinct and memory working together. Grace let her hand fall into her lap. Her breath clouded in front of her. She felt the weight of something both heavy and holy settle over her chest. For years she had thought of trauma as something buried, grief shoved down until it went quiet. But here, in the woods, she saw a different kind of silence, one that wrapped itself around the vulnerable, one that stayed even when no one asked it to. He stayed with her through the night, Grace said softly. Ivy nodded. Most dogs would have panicked, barked, bolted, but Ash waited. He knew she couldn't last alone, so he guarded her until someone came. Ben knelt beside them, staring into the hollow like it might still speak. He never barked, he said. That whole night, he just looked at us, like he trusted we'd understand. He chose you, Ivy said simply. They stayed there for a while, not moving. The clearing was quiet but not empty. Birds rustled softly in the branches overhead. A squirrel then fell silent again. Grace finally rose, brushing snow from her knees. "I want to come back here," she said. "You should," Ivy replied. "Why?" Ben asked. "To what? Build a monument?" "No," Grace said. Her voice was steady now. "To remember what purpose looks like when it has no orders." Ivy smiled, just faintly. They turned back toward the road, and behind them the hollow remained, a shelter in the storm, a cradle carved by loyalty, proof that somewhere between instinct and devotion there was still a place for the sacred. The wind had quieted by the time they reached the base of the hill. The snow here was thinner, patchy in places, exposing wet soil and old pine mulch. What remained had lost its sharpness, sagging under the weight of soft light and time. Grace stepped around a fallen branch, her boots leaving dark impressions on the forest floor. Behind her, Ivy moved with deliberate care, and Ben scanned the tree line with quiet vigilance. The hollow they had left behind still clung to her mind, its shape, its meaning. The image of a baby lying cradled not in a crib, but in snow, preserved by the precision of something that shouldn't have known how. They were about to circle back toward the access trail when a voice called out, "Don't move!" Ben spun instinctively, one hand near his belt. Not for a weapon, just reflex. The man stepped out from the trees slowly, hands raised. He was older than Grace expected, late 40s, maybe 50, lean in the way of people who live far from roads. His jacket was shearling-lined, patched in places with mismatched cloth. A scarf hung loosely from his neck, and his beard was wind-bitten, peppered gray. A hunting satchel was slung across his back, and on his hip hung a thermos, battered with years. "Didn't mean to startle you," he said. "Name's Samuel Wicks. I trap up this side." Grace relaxed. "You saw us from the ridge?" "Smelled the coffee first," he said, then chuckled once. "But yes, was already heading this way. Saw the post last night, about the dog." "You know him?" Ivy asked. Samuel gave her a long look, then nodded. "Not personally, but I've seen his prints. Enough times to know he's no ghost." Grace stepped forward. "You've tracked him?" Samuel's eyes were sharp, even if the rest of him seemed built for quiet. "Last saw his trail 3 nights ago, after the crash. I was on the North Bend, scouting near Deadfall when I heard movement. Not a coyote. Too big, too careful." He crouched near the tree line, brushing back a thin layer of snow, and carried her. Samuel nodded. Every sign says so. No drag marks, no frantic steps, just one slow, deliberate trail, like a parent who knew exactly where he was going. Ivy stepped beside him, her voice low. Where did the trail lead? Samuel stood. Back toward the ridge, toward the fire line. Grace felt the words settle like dust inside her chest. He took her to the place where his handler died. Samuel nodded. That's where his prints vanish, every time. Ben crossed his arms. So he's living out there? If you can call it that, Samuel said. He's not surviving, he's searching. You don't follow that many trails unless you're still waiting for something. Grace looked toward the slope beyond the pines. It ran north, disappearing behind old burned scars. Bark still blackened in patches, a skeleton forest standing watch over what had once been fire. You said you've seen him before, she said. Samuel nodded. Only at dusk. Never closer than 50 feet. He doesn't linger, but he watches. I think he's been guarding this side of the ridge ever since. Why? Ben asked. What's he looking for? Samuel's answer came without hesitation. Meaning. No one spoke for a while. Birdsong returned faintly to the canopy. Sparrows or finches, hard to tell. The forest was starting to stretch, to yawn out from under its snow blanket. And still, there was something in the stillness that held them. Grace looked down at the paw print again. The way it sank, the way it pointed. The memory of Isla's tiny form wrapped in a soldier's coat echoed behind her eyes. She was placed gently, she said, almost to herself. There were no bruises, no cold burns on her skin. Whoever carried her knew how to hold a baby. Samuel nodded again. He remembered what it meant to protect something small. Ivy touched Grace's shoulder. He wasn't hiding her. He was keeping her warm, keeping her seen. Ben blew out a slow breath. So what now? Samuel looked toward the ridge, squinting into the distance. You want to find him again? You don't chase. You wait. Grace folded her arms across her chest, eyes narrowing toward the place where the trail disappeared. No, she said. I follow. Samuel didn't argue. Instead, he bent to the snow again, brushed back another veil of melt, and pointed to the faint path of prints leading into the trees. You follow this long enough, he said. You don't just find a dog. What do you find? Grace asked. Samuel stood, meeting her gaze. A promise. The air changed before they saw anything. It wasn't colder, just quieter, in the way that silence sometimes feels reverent. They had followed Samuel's map past the black, touched the charred bark of a tree, fingers trailing over its fissures. This was the eastern edge of the ridge fire, she said, almost a whisper. Grace looked around. The canopy had never quite returned here. Most of the trees stood like skeletons, no leaves, just gray trunks, stretching upward like prayers never answered. This is where Tyler fell, Ivy added. The beam collapsed, right about there. She pointed to a hollow in the earth, surrounded by scorched stones and the melted remnants of what once might have been gear. They moved carefully. Grace stepped around an exposed root and spotted a glint in the snow. Hold on, she said, kneeling. Buried beneath a shallow crust of ice was a small rectangle, paper-thin but somehow intact despite the elements. Grace brushed it off gently with her glove. It was a photograph, faded, smoke-stained, one corner curled by fire, but still visible. Two figures. One, a young man in rescue gear, his smile soft and a little tired, eyes kind. The other, a German shepherd, upright and alert, his eyes locked on the camera with unmistakable focus. Tyler, Grant, and Ash. "They look like family," Ben murmured. Grace didn't speak. Her fingers trembled slightly as she lifted the photo. She didn't know this man, not really. But in the image, he held his dog, not like a handler, but like someone who trusted without condition. There was no leash between them, just presence. Then she heard it. Not footsteps, not rustling, just breath. Grace turned slowly. Ash stood 10 feet away. He hadn't made a sound. No bark, no whine. Just appeared, as if the forest itself had exhaled him into view. He looked older up close. His coat had grayed around the muzzle, and the scars on his flank told of time and distance and weather. But his eyes, those remained the same, deep, steady, unbearably alive. Ash stepped forward. Each movement was deliberate. No fear, no hesitation. Just grace, honed by years of waiting. He reached Grace and lowered his head, not in submission, but in recognition. Then, without a sound, he extended his neck and touched the photo with the tip of his nose. A moment passed, then another, and then Ash lay down beside it, in the snow, in the place where Tyler had fallen. Ivy's hand came to her mouth. She didn't cry, not quite, but her voice cracked when she spoke. "He's still guarding him." Ben knelt, slow and respectful. It's like he never left. Ash didn't move. His body was still, his ears relaxed. But his eyes watched the fire line, not as a dog lost, whispered. "Through the snow. You wrapped her. You waited until someone came." Ash's eyes closed for a second, just one, then opened again. And Grace saw it, something ancient in that gaze. Not just instinct, not just memory, but devotion carved so deeply that it had become identity. Ash wasn't surviving. He was fulfilling a promise. Grace gently placed the photo on the snow before him. Ash placed one paw over it. A hush fell. Even the wind seemed to step back. They sat like that for minutes that felt like prayers, unspoken but heard. Finally Grace whispered, "You found her. You saved her. You're not alone anymore." Ash didn't move, but his breathing slowed, soft, measured, like someone who, for the first time in years, could rest without guarding the door. Ben stood and took a few steps back. "We should give him this moment." Ivy nodded and followed, but Grace remained. She reached out, placing her hand on the snow beside Ash. Close but not touching. "You're not just a dog," she said, voice trembling. "You're the reason someone breathes tonight. The reason a baby still has a name." Ash blinked once, then turned his head toward the sky. Snow began to fall again, soft flakes, barely whispers as they landed. And Ash closed his eyes, not in exhaustion, but in peace. It was nearly midnight when the landline at Willow Outpost rang. Not many used that number anymore. The few who did knew it wasn't for appointments or routine follow-ups. It was for emergencies, or truths too old and heavy to carry alone. Grace was alone in the small front office. The light above her buzzed faintly, flickering now and then, as if weary of staying awake. Outside, the snow had softened into a steady hush. Inside, the fire in the corner hearth had burned low, casting long shadows on the walls. She picked up the receiver. "Willow Outpost. This is Grace Holloway." The voice on the other end was careful, steady, professional, but with an undertow of urgency. "Ms. Holloway, this is Lara Winslow with Helena County Social Services. I believe you recently admitted a female infant, approximately 6 days old, found during the snowstorm?" Grace straightened. "Yes, she's safe. She's doing well now. We've been calling her Isla, but there was no ID." "She has a name," Lara said gently. "Natalie Monroe is her mother. The baby's at Helena General under psychiatric watch. She believed her baby had died, until someone forwarded her the post you made, the one with the dog." Grace's throat tightened. The photo she had posted 2 days ago, Ash in the snow, sitting quietly behind the medical gurney as Isla, Olivia, was wheeled inside. The caption had been simple: "Not all heroes wear tags. He led us here." She recognized the stroller, Lara said, and the blanket. Grace could feel her pulse in her fingertips. "Can we speak to her?" "She's still fragile, but she's lucid now and begging to come." A pause. "May I ask?" Laura's voice faltered for the first time. "How did she survive?" Grace stared at the fireplace. "She was wrapped in a parka. She had no shoes, no hat. Her lips were blue when we found her." "You should have lost her," Laura murmured. "We would have," Grace said, voice barely above a breath, "if not for the dog." Lara hesitated. "The German Shepherd?" "Yes, his name is Ash." There was a long silence on the line. Then Lara said, "We'd like to send someone to retrieve Olivia as soon as it's safe to transport her, with your permission." "Of course," Grace said softly, "but please, can you give Natalie something? A message?" "Yes. Tell her she wasn't wrong to hope." A breath. "I will." When Grace hung up, she sat in the silence for a long time, the phone cradled in her lap like a relic. Outside, the wind had picked up again, brushing powdery snow against the window pane like fingertips searching for warmth. Behind her, a soft shuffle. Grace turned. Ash had entered the room. No sound, no fanfare, just presence. He stood in the doorway, silhouetted by firelight, head slightly lowered, ears forward. As if he knew. As if he'd been waiting for this. Grace rose to her feet and walked toward him. "Her name is Olivia," she said. Ash didn't move. "She wasn't abandoned," Grace added, kneeling before him. "She wasn't forgotten. She was just lost." She reached out and gently laid a hand against the side of his face. He didn't flinch. His eyes met hers, clear, deep, impossibly old. "You found her," Grace whispered, "and now she gets to go home." Ash blinked once, then turned his head toward the snow-covered window, not as a dog awaiting praise, but as a soul who had simply completed what he was made for. Grace let the silence linger between them, not empty, but full. Full of everything that were daughter in both arms. Ash sat at the end of the hallway, watching. He didn't approach, didn't wag his tail. He only watched, with the solemn dignity of one who had kept vigil long after others had surrendered. And when Natalie, holding Olivia to her chest, turned toward him, she paused. Their eyes met. She didn't say thank you. She didn't have to. Ash dipped his head slightly, a nod, and then he turned, and walked out into the snow. The wheels of the county SUV crunched over the half-plowed parking lot, then stilled in a long, shivering idle. Morning light lay pale across Willow Outpost, painting frost on every pane. Inside, staff hovered in corridors, like people afraid of breathing too loud. Grace waited by the entrance, palms damp despite the cold, a single thought repeating through every heartbeat, "Please let this be gentle." The back door of the vehicle opened. Natalie Monroe stepped out with the unsteady care of someone learning to trust the earth again. She was small in her oversized coat, hair a tangle of honey brown that hadn't seen a brush in days, cheeks hollowed by sleepless worry. A social service escort lingered behind her, but Natalie moved forward on her own, hands clenched around the frayed strap of a canvas diaper bag. Empty now, more talisman than utility. Grace opened the glass door. "Natalie, I'm Grace." Natalie lifted her eyes. Terror lived there still, but beneath it, something brighter, wild, fragile hope. "She's really alive?" The words came out hushed, coated in disbelief. Grace's throat tightened. "Yes, she's waiting for you." She guided Natalie down the hall, each fluorescent light flicking on as they passed. The walls carried faint echoes, footsteps, whispered updates, the click of a keyboard, but the louder sound was Natalie's breathing, shallow and quick, as though one wrong step might awaken the nightmare again. At the nursery threshold, Natalie faltered. Through the window she saw a bassinet, a tiny form swaddled in soft cream blankets, one fist resting near a rose-petal cheek. Dr. Quinn adjusted a monitor, then stepped aside, leaving only the heartbeat's gentle beep to fill the quiet. Grace touched Natalie's elbow. "Go ahead." Natalie took one step, then another, and crossed the threshold. She didn't scream. The sorrow and relief were too heavy for sound. Instead, her knees buckled, folding beneath her as though every muscle surrendered at once. She landed softly on the linoleum, palms splayed, eyes locked on the sleeping infant. "Olivia!" The name escaped her like a prayer, half remembered and half feared, a syllable fragile as glass. Isla, Olivia, stirred, lids fluttering, lips pursing in an almost pout. The tiny hand relaxed, fingers opening to the world. Natalie covered her mouth, shifted. Ash stepped into the doorway. He had followed without instruction, pause, silent on tile. The room seemed to breathe differently around him. Staff down the corridor stilled at his arrival, drawn by some instinct older than procedure. His coat, snow-dusted when he'd slipped out earlier, now glimmered with damp melt, roughened by time, yet noble in its bearing. He saw Natalie. He saw the trembling silhouette of grief transforming into gratitude. And he moved. Not a rush, not a leap, just a deliberate walk. Pads whispering over the floor until he reached her side. Natalie's tears hadn't yet cleared from her lashes when she felt warmth press against her knee. She looked down to see those amber eyes, ancient steady, looking up at her without demand. Recognition hit like a tide. "You?" Her voice cracked, slowly shaking. She extended trembling fingers toward his muzzle. Ash did not flinch. He dipped his head, allowing her palm to rest against coarse fur, still cool from the morning air. A single sob escaped her chest, not pain, but release. Ash lowered onto his haunches, then slid forward until his torso lay against the floor, paws folded, nose gently touching the hem of her coat. He did not break eye contact, anchoring her in the present, telling her in the only language he owned, "She is yours. She was never lost." Grace felt heat behind her eyes. In all her years of rescue, she had seen reunions, parents and children, hikers and families, pets and owners, but nothing like this quiet covenant between a grieving mother and the sentinel who defied winter to give her back tomorrow. Natalie lifted her gaze to the bassinet. With reverent slowness she rose, one hand still resting on Ash's head for balance, as though drawing courage from that silent heartbeat. She leaned over the rail, tears dropping onto blanket wool. "Hi, my love," she whispered. "Mommy's here." Olivia's eyes slid open, blue, unfocused, and for a breathless instant, the world narrowed to that gaze meeting Natalie's. Tiny fingers flexed, brushing her mother's knuckle. No cry, no fear, only a newborn's unfiltered trust. Natalie wept openly then, but not for death, for life returned. Ash stood again, turning so his flank pressed against Natalie's leg, an offer of steadiness. She let the borrowed strength hold her upright as she slid arms beneath her daughter, lifting Olivia into the curve of her body. The monitor wires adjusted, a nurse stepping forward to help, but the scene remained hush, sacred. "Natalie, peace." For minutes, no one spoke. Even the monitors seemed to soften their electronic cadence, aligning to the rhythm of mother and child. Natalie pressed her nose into Olivia's downy hair, breathing in the undeniable scent of life. The ache that had hollowed her since the crash began to fill, slowly, painfully, with something warmer than hope. Certainty. When Natalie finally looked up, her gaze found Grace. Gratitude swelled in her reddened eyes, but before words could form, she turned to Ash. "How can I thank you?" she whispered. Ash blinked once, then rested his chin gently on the toe of her boot. Beside him, the photograph Grace had tucked into her pocket slipped free. Tyler and Ash, a memory rescued from flame. Natalie noticed, kneeling again to reach for it. She traced Tyler's face with a fingertip, then looked at Ash anew. "You carried her," she said, realization dawning like sunrise. "You carried my baby through the storm." Ash lifted his head, eyes shining, not with pride, but with a quiet acknowledgement of duty fulfilled. Natalie pressed the photo to her heart. Grace watched the circle close, past loss knitting itself into present grace. In that hush, every broken thing seemed, for a moment, capable of mending. And the dog who remembered kept watch, the storm behind him, and peace, at last, within reach. Dusk settled over Willow Outpost like a quilt stitched from mauves and storm-washed blues. The day's small victories, Olivia's steady temperature, Natalie's first smile that reached her eyes, Dr. Quinn's quiet hum as she updated the chart, folded into a hush so gentle that every sound felt amplified. The tick of the hallway clock, the distant gurgle of a coffee pot warming stale decaf, the soft scuff of Grace's boots on linoleum. Grace moved down the corridor carrying a spare blanket for Natalie. Visiting hours were long past, but no one had the heart to ask the young mother to leave. Some reunions outranked policy. Some nights belonged to healing more than to sleep. A muted bedside lamp cast honey-colored light across room 4. Through the cracked door, Grace saw Natalie in the rocking chair, Olivia tucked against her chest. The slow sway of mother and child, so rhythmic, it seemed part of the building's architecture, like walls, like beams, like breath. Ash sat just outside the threshold. He had not left this spot since afternoon rounds. His body formed a quiet arch against the wall, paws crossed, ears forward. He neither slept nor stared. He listened, head tilted toward every sigh that floated from the room, as though smile. With one hand she stroked Olivia's back. With the other she extended her fingertips toward Ash. The dog's tail brushed the floor once, no wag, merely acknowledgement. Then he inched forward until his shoulder touched a door jamb, close enough to feel pulse and scent without trespassing. "He knew she was mine," Natalie whispered, voice ribbon thin but certain. Grace stepped closer, blanket folded against her chest. "Why do you think that?" Natalie's gaze drifted to Ash. "When I walked in, he didn't bark, didn't block me. He moved aside so I could reach her." She swallowed. "Animals can tell when we lie, can't they? I think mothers too." A tremor flickered through her words. "My grief walked in first, loud, clumsy, and he read it like a trail. He knew." Grace felt the truth of that settle into her bones. Ash had measured everyone, in micro-movements, in the hush between footfalls, deciding when to intervene, when to guide, when simply to bear witness. It was an intelligence that transcended training, a language of instinct fused with memory. She knelt beside him now, resting on her heels so their eyes met. His gaze was clear, unburdened by the day's emotion, yet carrying all of it at once, like a vessel built for storms. "You're staying the night, then?" Grace murmured. Ash blinked once, slow, deliberate. His shoulders eased, but he didn't look away. Decision made, Grace turned to Natalie. "There's a cot in the next room, if you want to lie down. Dr. Quinn rigged a baby monitor, so you can hear every rustle. But," she glanced at Ash, "I don't think you have to worry about missing anything." Natalie managed a small laugh, the sound shaky but real. "I'll stay here a little longer. I've missed enough bedtimes already." Grace handed her the blanket. "For your shoulders." As Natalie adjusted the fabric over herself and Olivia, Grace leaned back against the wall beside Ash. The dog shifted just enough to accommodate her, fur brushing her sleeve like a promise of warmth. The hallway light clicked off automatically at 10, leaving only the glow from room 4, and a sliver of moonlight slanting in through a high window. In that half-shadow, Grace let her head rest against cool plaster. She listened to the rocking chair's soft creak, to Olivia's faint suck-sleep breathing, to the silence Ash wore like ceremonial armor. He'll stay as long as she does, Grace thought. Maybe longer. The realization struck her with unexpected weight. Ash belonged to no one now. No badge, no handler, no governing body. He chose his posts. He wrote his own orders in paw prints and intuition. And yet part of her, sudden fear of emptiness after presence, the dread of returning to rooms stripped of meaning. Grace's breath hitched. She remembered how Ash had pressed his nose to Tyler's scorched photograph, remembered the quiet lowering of his body onto snow, as though laying down a burden too heavy to carry further. She realized she was not looking at a passerby. She was looking at a survivor, learning finally how to rest. Could I send him away, she wondered? Could I ever watch him walk back into the timber and simply let him go? As if sensing her turmoil, Ash lifted his head. His amber eyes reflected twin shards of lamplight. He didn't tilt his ears or whine. He only watched her, the same way he had looked at Natalie, at Olivia, at Tyler's fireline photo, measuring need, weighing intention. In that silent exchange, Grace felt her heart open to possibilities she'd shut out for years. A home, not haunted, but guarded. late-night patrols through empty streets beside a loyal shadow. The comfort of knowing no cry would go unheard so long as Ash was near. The ache of wanting startled her. It felt too tender, too soon, like skin knitting over a new scar. But the thought remained. Natalie's rocking slowed. Olivia slept deeper, her small fist uncurling against her mother's chest. Natalie's eyelids drooped under the lullaby of exhaustion. She looked at Grace over the bassinet's rim. "Will they keep him?" she asked in a hush, nodding toward Ash. "Take him somewhere?" Grace's answer hovered on a precipice between regulation and desire. She thought of kennels, of fluorescent pens lined with barking sorrow. She thought of the woods, of an aging shepherd, wandering ever-circling paths in search of the next lost voice. "No," she said finally, quiet but certain. "Not if I can help it." A single tear slipped down Natalie's cheek. Gratitude without flourish. Ash lowered his head to his paws, body relaxing by degrees. A sigh left him, deep enough to ruffle the hallway dust, like air escaping a chamber long sealed. Grace reached out, hesitated, then laid her hand on his crest. The fur was coarse yet warm, carrying the scent of pine and distant smoke, and something older than language. For the first time since the storm, Grace allowed herself to imagine a life beyond bare survival, one where duty and healing might share the same roof. Outside, snow began again in fine silver threads, painting the night new. Inside, a mother slept, tension gathered in the corners like dust motes, waiting to settle where it shouldn't. Grace sat straight-backed in a vinyl chair, hands folded, knuckles pale beneath the fluorescent glare. Across the desk, Deputy Cullen Barrett and County Animal Services Coordinator Nora Brenner leafed through a slim stack of forms. Their polyester jackets rasped whenever they moved, an impatient sound as though bureaucracy itself had become restless. Ash lay just outside the doorway, chin on paws. He looked neither wary nor resigned, merely present, eyes half-lidded, yet alert to every shift in posture, every raised voice. Behind those amber irises sat a patience older than the paper-pushing world trying to corral him. Nora cleared her throat. "Ms. Delaney, as it stands today, the animal technically meets the definition of an unowned stray. No microchip, no current handler of record, no licensing tags. County protocol requires we place him in a holding facility for evaluation and potential adoption." Her tone was not unkind. It was simply practiced, the cadence of someone who'd recited policy often enough to feel it settle like scripture. She slid a form across the desk. Intake request, bold, at the top. Grace did not look at the paper. "You understand he's no ordinary stray." Cullen spoke up, flipping through notes. "I get that he helped Grace, but ordinances exist for a reason. Liability, vaccinations, temperament." "He's vaccinated," Ivy said from the corner, leaning on her cane. All heads turned. She'd been silent until now, content to let Grace steer, but the word shot from her like a dart. Titer tests confirmed during his deployment years. Rabies good through next winter, if my memory serves, and I bet it does. Nora blinked. Even so, field records don't change legal status if the handler is deceased. Grace's jaw tightened. She pictured that lone silhouette guarding the nursery door, the way Ash rose only when Natalie's grief entered the room. How he'd resumed his post the moment Olivia exhaled safely in slumber. The idea of him inside a chain-link run, drowned in the frantic chorus of abandoned dogs, felt like sacrilege. "So, your plan," Grace said softly, "is to move a traumatized working dog from the place he has chosen to serve, confine him in concrete, and hope some family that doesn't understand what he's been trained to do picks him up at a weekend adoption fair." Nora hesitated. "Our shelter has rehabilitation partners." "He doesn't need rehabilitation," Grace interrupted, voice aren't ours to keep. Ash isn't waiting for someone to claim him. He already made his claim on this community, on that child, on anyone lost enough to need him. Silence spilled across the room. Outside the doorway, Ash lifted his head. A distant door closed, and he tracked the sound, but returned his gaze to Grace, as though reading her pulse. Dr. Quinn, seated in the back, finally spoke. "There's precedent for honorary working status. Some towns grant local service dogs unofficial posts, school bus crosswalk monitors, facility comfort dogs, liability waivers through municipal insurance." Nora frowned. "Usually those programs require a handler on payroll." "Then we adjust," Quinn said. "Make him a ward of the clinic. He stays on site. We cover feed, medical, and let him continue what he plainly intends to do: watch over the vulnerable." Colin tapped his pen, weighing optics. "County board will ask who signs the risk form." Grace inhaled. "I will." Heads turned. "I'm not his master," she continued, feeling the declaration settle deep. "But I'll stand as steward. I live on the edge of town, acreage, fenced. He can come and go. I'll log his vaccinations, renew tags under my address. You need paperwork? I'll sign every line." Nora studied Grace's face, searching for hesitation and finding none. She glanced at Ash, silent, still, unblinking. Colin's radio crackled at his belt, a thin voice requesting status on a fender bender down Highway 12. He muted it, exhaled. "Tell me this, why are you willing to upend your life for a dog you met 4 days ago?" Grace's answer came without pause. "Because 4 days ago he carried a life through a blizzard and laid it at my feet to save. Because when everyone else ran out of orders, he kept listening for a cry. Because he has a job, deputy, and he's already chosen to do it here." Ivy's eyes shone with quiet fire. "And because some promises made in flame shouldn't end in cages." The room pulsed with slow heartbeats. Nora folded her hands over the intake form. She looked at Colin, then Quinn. Finally, she slid the paper back into her folder, unsigning it. "I can file for provisional placement," she said. 60-day review. During that time, the county monitors his welfare. If there are no incidents, no aggression, no complaints, we can motion for a special service designation." Grace nodded, a knot in her chest easing. "Thank you." Nora warned, "There will be inspections, unannounced." "Then announce them," Ivy said dryly. "We'll put the kettle on." A small, reluctant smile stopped beside Grace, pressing his head lightly against her thigh. She rested a hand on his neck. The contact felt less like ownership, more like confirmation. "Welcome home," she whispered. Ash's tail swept the floor once, quiet as a promise kept. Outside, the morning sun slipped free of cloud cover, spilling amber down the hall where Natalie slept with Olivia, safe beneath the watch of a guardian who served no master but need itself. The tires of Grace's Subaru crunched over gravel, scattering damp pine needles as she pulled into the yard of Fire Station 9. The building was a broad-shouldered relic of red brick and corrugated steel, its paint sun-bleached to a muted cardinal. Beside the high bay doors, a wooden sign still bore the scorch marks of embers that had blown in from the ridge fire 3 winters earlier. Scars the crew refused to sand away. A reminder of the call they could not rewrite. A single engine sat in the drive, half-washed, its chrome dulled by late-season grit. Grace stepped out, the March air raw enough to nip her cheeks, and Ash hopped down after her. He paused, nose lifted, as though cataloging every invisible thread that tied him to this place. Despite the memories embedded in its walls, the station seemed to greet him like an open palm instead of a clenched fist. Captain Neil Bram emerged from the side door, wiping his hands on a rag. Late 50s, shoulders like timber beams, hair cropped silver against a sun-creased brow. He carried the bearing of a man who'd learned to stand sturdy in both applause and condolence. "Grace Delaney," he called, voice roughened by decades of smoke and briefing rooms. She nodded, offering a tentative smile. "Thank you for letting us visit, Captain." Neil's gaze dropped to Ash. Something softened in the lines around his mouth. "Well, look who finally wandered home," he murmured. He crouched, slowly, knees protesting, until he met the shepherd's eyes. Ash didn't move, but his tail brushed the concrete once, like a flag half-mast, raised for recognition. Neil stood and motioned them inside. "Come on, the bullpen's empty. Crew's out on drills. Gives us room to breathe." Inside smelled of wet gear, diesel, and that faint sweet ash that clings to turnout coats, even after vigorous washing. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, reflecting off rows of helmets resting on open lockers, each name stenciled in black. Grace's gaze settled on one. Open the binder. Pages of neat, blocky handwriting. Tyler's, detailing drills, scent-tracking runs, medical clearances. Stuck between sheets were creased Polaroids, Ash weaving through orange cones, Ash standing guard beside a row of infant mannequins in bassinets, Ash curled beneath a crib as a stopwatch ticked. Neil tapped one entry dated May 17, 2 years before the fire. Drill. Rapid Infant Rescue, Phase 3. Scenario. Nursery building filled with simulated smoke. Objective. Locate silent infant doll in 2-story structure. Result. Ash located target in 27 seconds. Note. He ignored audible cry decoys, zeroed on human scent cloth with 0 prompt. "He was never distracted by sound," Neil said quietly. "He interpreted it." Tyler joked that Ash could tell a difference between a hungry cry and a hurt one better than any parent on 4 hours of sleep. Grace traced the ink with a fingertip. "So finding Olivia, it fits." Neil turned a few more pages, slowing at a photograph Tyler had taped in as a joke. It showed Ash in a line of baby cribs during a community safety demo. Every infant had fallen asleep mid-presentation, except Ash, eyes alert beneath the mobiles. Tyler's caption read, "Night shift volunteer, doesn't ask for overtime biscuits. Tyler believed a dog's purpose comes from its handler's heart, Neil said, voice fracturing. He trained Ash for what scared him most, not getting to a child in time. Grace closed the binder gently, the weight of the stories pressed into her palms. Do you know why Ash brought Olivia back to the ridge? Why revisit the fire line? Neil leaned against the file cabinet, arms crossed. Maybe he was showing her where her guardian fell, or maybe that place became his compass. When he's unsure where to go, he orients to the greatest loss and waits for new purpose to rise from the ashes. Ash lifted his head, ears pricking at the word loss. Grace met his gaze, feeling both ache and awe twist inside her. I've filed papers to keep him as a facility dog, she said. Provisional status, but it's a start. Neil's weathered face cracked into a slow smile. Tyler would like that. Ash never flourished in kennels. He needs corridors to patrol, souls to listen to. He reached into a drawer and produced a faded red harness. The reflective lettering read, K9 Rescue Infant Unit. Burn marks charred its edges. One strap was stitched where nylon had melted. Found this in Tyler's locker. Been waiting to give it to someone. Neil offered it across the desk. Grace took the harness carefully. Ash it, but because Tyler asked and Ash chose to answer. Grace slipped the harness over the shepherd's head, adjusting the straps to fit his older frame. The fabric settled like a cloak reclaimed, a mantle returning to its bearer. Ash straightened, not puffing out in pride, but inhabiting the role he'd never truly shed. In that instant, Grace felt the station breathe. Every helmet, every length of hose seemed to exhale relief at a missing piece restored. Welcome back, partner, Neil whispered, voice hoarse. Ash's tail swept the floor once, echoing the pages of the logbook, fluttering in a draft no one else felt. Grace rose, emotion thick in her throat. He has work to do, and so do we. Together they stepped from the office into the engine bay. Sunlight spilled through the open door, scattering dust like embers suspended in air. Ash padded forward, harness catching glints of gold. Grace followed, carrying with her the ledger of a life written in paw prints and lullabies, ready to turn the next page. The afternoon quiet of Station 9 was a different species of stillness, thicker, almost reverent. Engines slept behind bay doors, radios murmured only occasional weather bulletins. Dust motes drifted through angled sunbeams like slow-moving constellations, and every echo felt padded by unseen hands. Grace found the old oak bench against the west wall, the same bench Tyler's crew had used for quick breathers between alarms. Its varnish was chipped and sun-softened, edges rounded by decades of turnout coat shoulders and coffee cup clatter. She settled onto the worn slats, the faint scent of linseed oil and smoke rising from the grain like a remembered hymn. Ash padded forward, harness gleaming muted red beneath the light, then lowered himself beside the bench with a slow exhale. His paws stretched out, crossing neatly, muscles uncoiled in small increments until he lay still, almost sphinx-like, but with a fatigue that seemed to seep from the walls themselves. It was the posture of a guardian finally offered permission to breathe. Grace held the scorched photograph Neil had given her, Tyler kneeling in dusty gear, one arm slung around a younger, sleeker Ash. Both faces turned toward the camera, eyes bright, smiles mirror images in two different species. The corner had curled, heat-seared, yet the moment it captured remained intact, untouched by the fire that later claimed so much. She traced the ragged edge with her thumb. Tyler's grin, the way Ash leaned just enough to press their shoulders together. A quiet kept swelling in her chest, a tenderness too big for bone, too old for words. Without lifting her gaze, she said, "You didn't forget, did you?" Ash twitched an ear. His head angled slightly as though he recognized the shape of sorrow even when whispered. Grace continued, "The years. You remembered." Her throat tightened. She pressed the photograph closer to her heart, as if warming the lost snapshot could thaw the years between then and now. Ash shifted. The move was almost imperceptible, a gentle scoot of his haunches toward her boots, a lowering of his massive shoulders. Then, for the very first time since she'd met him on that blizzard-silenced road, he lifted his head and rested it heavily, trustingly, into her lap. Grace stilled. The weight surprised her, not because of its heft, but because of its deliberate gentleness, the way he pressed just enough to anchor himself without demanding. His breath warmed the fabric of her jeans. She could feel each inhale against her thigh, slow and measured, as if syncing his pulse to hers. Carefully, she set the photo on the bench and let her fingers sink into the thick fur at his neck. Coarse guard hairs gave way to softer undercoat. Beneath that, the ripple of muscle and the steady hum of a heart that had marched through snow and ash and silence to arrive here. "I'm not Tyler," she whispered. "I can't ever be him." Ash's tail brushed the floor once, a silent, "I know." "But if you'll have me," she went on, voice trembling, "I'll try to listen the way he did. I'll try to hear what you hear." Outside, a distant gust rattled the bay door panels, and the station breathed with them, steel, wood, and concrete, remembering lives lived inside its bones. Somewhere down the hall, a hush of boots announced the firefighter passing by, but he paused at the sight. Medic and dog, sharing a pocket of time no alarm could claim. He tipped his chin in respect, then moved on without a word. Grace kept stroking. Ash's lashes fluttered once, then rested. For the briefest moment, he looked entirely at peace. No watchman tension, no scanning ears, just a dog who had carried too much for too long, finally laying down a burden. In that hush, memory unfurled. The newborn's faint breath against sub-zero wind. Ash's silhouette in headlight glare, immovable, unwavering. The hollow carved in snow like a cradle shaped by devotion. Natalie's knees hitting linoleum, gratitude flowing soundless. Olivia's tiny fist brushing aged fur, bridging fear and safety. Every thread wound back to this shepherd, this quiet sentinel who answered cries no one else could hear. Grace blinked against the sting in her eyes. "You didn't forget," she repeated, the words of vow wrapped in awe. "And I won't either." She thought of the provisional papers, the inspections, a skeptical county board. She pictured Ash walking hospital halls at dusk, a warmth, slow, ember-deep, kindled beneath her ribs. She lifted the photograph again, holding it where Ash could see. "He's proud of you," she said. Ash inhaled, a tremor passing through his chest, then exhaled with a sigh that sounded like ash settling after flame. Grace leaned back against the bench, shoulders softening, and let the weight of his trust press gently into her lap. The sun slipped lower, slanting copper light across the station floor, catching motes and making them glow. For the first time since the storm, the mutter of doubt in Grace's mind quieted. In its place rose a certainty as simple as heartbeat. Whatever came next, shelter inspections, sleepless nights, ghosts of old grief, she wouldn't meet it alone. Outside, a fresh wind rolled in from the ridge carrying the scent of thawing earth and distant pine smoke. It slipped through the cracked bay door, lifted the edge of Tyler's empty locker tag, and stirred the air around bench and dog and medic, braiding past and present into a single steady breath. Ash's eyes drifted closed. Grace's hand stilled over his ears. And somewhere in the silence a promise old as loyalty settled into place. We keep watch, together. The gravel road curled through pine stands into a quiet valley where spring-fed creeks threaded silver over thawing ground. Grace pulled the Subaru to a stop before a weathered cabin. No smoke rose from its chimney. It hadn't for years, but the carved sign still read, Road's End. Natalie stepped out, cradling baby Isla. The child cooed into the pine-scented air, eyes wide with wonder. The days had passed since leaving the clinic. Natalie moved as if grief still lingered beneath each breath. Grace unloaded the hatchback. Ash, her old German shepherd, hopped down and padded to the porch, tail low but wagging. He sniffed the steps, then stood sentry, quietly approving. "This was my father's," Grace told Natalie. "He built it after Mom died. It's simple, but the creeks cool the place in summer and lull you to sleep in spring." Inside, dust danced in sunlight. A battered sofa, cedar table, and cold fireplace filled the room. Ash circled the crib Grace had borrowed, then laid beside it, chin on paws, eyes never leaving the baby. "He hasn't left her side," Grace said softly. Natalie smiled. "Some angels bark." They opened shutters and aired linens. Ash watched every move, a silent supervisor. By afternoon, the chill pushed Grace toward the hearth she hadn't used since her father's funeral. Natalie joined her, hand on shoulder. "Let's warm the house." Grace lit a fire using logs her father had chopped years ago. As flames flickered, warmth returned. First to the walls, then to Grace's chest. Natalie swayed with Isla, firelight painting their faces with peace. Ash shifted closer, still on alert, positioning himself between crib and door. Grace sat back, her sister laughing by the porch. Natalie leaned against her in silence. "Feels like starting over," she whispered. "Maybe it is," Grace replied. As dusk fell, the radio played soft violin. Isla slept in her crib, Natalie curled under a quilt, and Ash remained on duty, resting yet ready. The harness he once wore hung by the door, but his role needed no reminder. Grace poured chamomile into chipped enamel mugs. She settled into her father's old rocker. The fire popped. Ash's ears twitched at a distant owl, but he didn't stir. "You should sleep," Grace murmured. Ash closed his eyes, not in surrender, but trust. The cabin breathed again, not as a relic of loss, but a place reborn. Isla's breath, Natalie's calm, the dog's unwavering presence, all stitched new life into old walls. Moonlight silvered the streams outside, and in the quiet, Grace realized she hadn't just opened the cabin, she'd opened herself. To love, to healing, to the silent oath of a guardian who kept watch until dawn. Natalie wrapped her hands around the mug, inhaling steam. "I've been thinking." Grace smiled gently. "Dangerous pastime." Natalie huffed a laugh, small, genuine. "I thought after Isla was found, I'd rush back to Missoula, sell the apartment, start over closer to my sister, keep busy until the nightmares dimmed. But—" she glanced toward the window where early light painted spruce silhouettes on glass. "The idea of leaving here feels wrong." Grace's brow lifted. "Wrong how?" "Back home," Natalie said, voice low. "Grief lived in the curtains. Every corner smelled like formula I never got to use. The nursery door, shut tight, felt like an accusation." She paused, swallowing. "Here, grief breathes. It walks the creek banks, settles in the pine needles, then floats away on wind. It doesn't choke me." Grace let the words linger. Outside, chickadees flitted between branches, their chatter a bright counter-melody to running water. Natalie straightened. "There's an opening at the Sable Ridge Library, part-time assistant. Miss Pratt, the mayor, mentioned it when she brought over casseroles." She smiled shyly. Apparently, small towns still believe calories cure trauma. Sometimes they do, Grace said, tapping her own midriff. I want to stay, Natalie continued, tone firmer. Raise Isla where the mountains watch over us, where Ash keeps one eye on her and one on the door. She glanced at the shepherd. His tail swept the floor in quiet assent. Will that disrupt your life? Grace leaned back, surprise flickering into warmth. This cabin was built for more laughter than I could ever make alone. You belong, Nat. Natalie exhaled. Landscape that welcomes your scars. It's different. Natalie squeezed her fingers. And the library? You'll be perfect. Have you met the children in town? They think books are spells that summon dragons. They need a keeper of stories. Natalie laughed softly. Then I'll guard the dragons. A beat of comfortable silence settled. Isla rustled, letting out a squeak. Ash lifted his head, nose poking between crib slats. Satisfied, he lay down again. Grace studied Natalie's profile, color in her cheeks, shoulders no longer hunched like collapsing tents. Healing, slow but palpable. There's a guest house behind the cabin, my dad's old workshop. Needs fresh paint and a new stovepipe, but with a little elbow grease. Natalie's eyes widened. A place of our own without leaving. Grace nodded. We'll fix it together. Ivy promised her legendary hammer skills, and Ben's hopeless at carpentry, but good for comic relief. Natalie's smile glowed. Yes, please. Grace stood, refilling mugs, heart buoyant in a way she'd nearly forgotten. Then it settled. We'll talk to Maya Pratt about the higher forms, and I'll call Dale, the canine behaviorist. He can evaluate Ash in his new environment. At the mention of his name, Ash thumped his tail again, as though noting an agenda item. Natalie rose, walked to the crib, and lifted Isla into her arms. Sunlight haloed mother and daughter. She swayed, humming an old lullaby that seemed to weave with creek song outside. Grace watched, throat thick. The cabin, once echoing with ghosts, now thrummed with living things. Fire embers, infant heartbeats, a shepherd's soft breaths. Natalie turned, eyes shimmering. Thank you, Grace, for sharing your home, your courage. Grace shook her head. You're the brave one. I'm just following Ash's lead, listening for cries beneath the wind. They shared a quiet laugh, understanding that bravery often looks like opening doors, lighting fireplaces, and saying yes to second chances. Ash stood, stretched, and padded to Natalie's side. He nuzzled Isla's blanket, then pressed his head against Natalie's thigh, as if sealing a pact. Natalie stroked his ears. We're staying, big guy. Hope that's all right. Ash's wag answered for him. Grace stepped onto the porch, mugs steaming in the cool air. The creeks gleamed, intertwining like silver threads, stitching valley to sky. A hawk circled high, riding thermal promise. And Grace felt, in marrow and breath, that the valley itself had inhaled their stories, ready to exhale new ones. She turned back into the cabin where fire crackled, a mother rocked, a dog kept watch, and grief, though still present, now breathed freely, expanding to make space. The old spruce logs. Ivy climbed out first, adjusting her rain-spotted hat, then gestured to the passenger door. Dale Rankin unfolded himself from the seat, broad-shouldered, mid-30s, a sleeve of faded military tattoos half hidden beneath a flannel shirt. His gait bespoke long marches and longer patience, the kind of presence that fills a room without raising a voice. He carried only a small field notebook and a braided leather lead coiled at his belt, though Grace guessed he rarely needed to clip it on. "Grace Delaney?" he asked, extending a hand. His grip was firm, but not testing. "Thanks for coming, Dale. Ivy's told me good things. Ivy smirked. Don't let it go to his head. They stepped inside to the hearth's glow, and the faint aroma of oatmeal cookies Natalie had bravely attempted. Isla lay awake in her crib by the window, kicking at air, gurgling at raindrops racing down glass. Ash lay as usual alongside, ears ticking toward every sound, yet body loose with the familiarity of duty embraced. At the newcomer's entrance, he lifted his head, nose flaring, but he neither barked nor rose. Dale paused a respectful distance, squatting to Ash's eye level without reaching. "Permission?" he asked Grace. "He knows you're here to watch." Dale hummed low in his throat, a tonal greeting rather than speech. Ash's ears pricked. He stood, gave a single shake, then approached. The shepherd's tail hung neutral, neither tucked nor wagging, an invitation to dialogue. Dale offered the back of his hand. Ash sniffed, then nudged it once with his muzzle, before pivoting to face the crib again, resuming his post. "Interesting," Dale murmured, jotting in his notebook. Checks the stranger, then returns to point of focus. No displacement sniffing, no anxious yawns. He's comfortable enough to delegate me to the periphery. Natalie appeared from the kitchenette, wiping flour from her palms. "Coffee? Tea?" "Black coffee, thanks," Dale said, eyes still on Ash and Isla. He watched as Isla let out a sudden squeal of delight, one of those newborn exclamations too surprised at its own sound. Instantly, Ash stood, positioning his body between crib and room, head tipped toward the infant. When Isla quieted into tiny hiccups, he relaxed, lying down but keeping his chin just inside the crib's reach. Isla's tiny fist drifted outward, finding coarse fur. Dale exhaled softly. Textbook protective posture, but notice the restraint. He never crowds her, allows snap toward Dale, ears erect, but he did not bark. Instead, he placed one paw delicately on the crib's leg as if anchoring it to the earth, eyes tracking Dale with quiet warning. Dale raised both palms in apology. "Just a stimulus test. Response is protective, not aggressive. Good threshold." He jotted more notes. Grace folded her arms, half anxious. "So, what's your read?" Dale closed the notebook. "This isn't just bonding," he said, turning toward the group. "It's imprinting." Natalie furrowed her brow. "Meaning?" "In ethology," Dale explained, imprinting is a rapid phase-sensitive learning process where an animal forms attachments that are functionally permanent. Think ducklings following the first moving object they see. Working dogs can imprint too, especially after trauma resets their social compass. Ash lost his handler, his purpose, then encountered a new vulnerable stimulus, Isla, during heightened stress. He didn't merely protect her. He rewired his mission around her. Ivy's expression softened with understanding. "And the rest of us?" "We're adjuncts," Dale said. "Important, but ancillary to the primary bond. He sees your well-being as instrumental to hers. That's why he grants you space, but his operating system now boots to Isla every morning." Natalie wrapped arms around herself. "So if we left town—" "He'd follow," Dale answered without hesitation, "or he'd search until he found you. Separating them abruptly would risk extreme distress." Grace felt the cabin tilt with the weight of that truth, but it wasn't fear she felt. It was resolve threading into bone. "You're not adopting a dog," Dale continued, gentler now. "You're accepting a legacy. He carries the training of a fallen firefighter and the imprint of this child. Respect that, and you'll have the most reliable guardian alive. Disrespect it, and you break something sacred. Silence filled the cabin, punctuated by rain tapping cedar shingles. Isla yawned, fist still entwined in Ash's coat, and the shepherd lowered his head to the floor, half closing his eyes. A sentry at ease, yet never off duty. Grace stepped forward, crouched beside the pair. We don't intend to break anything. She turned to Natalie. We build around it. Natalie's answer came with a steady nod. He saved her life. The least we can do is honor the life he built from that night. Dale smiled, lines easing around his eyes. Then my job's simple. Design a stewardship plan, exercise regimens, mental stimulation drills, secondary handler cues. He looked at Grace. That'll be you. You'll need to learn his silent commands. Grace glanced at Ash, shimmering with gratitude. Thank you, Dale. My pleasure, he said. He glanced out the window where rain light brightened the mossy trunks. Some dogs teach us more about duty than any uniform. Ash reminds me why I traded a rifle for a clicker. He snapped his notebook shut. I'll draft the plan tonight. Grace escorted him to the door. Be careful on the drive back. Storm's clearing, he said, inhaling the scent of wet pine. Good omen. When the door closed behind him, Grace turned. Natalie had settled into the rocker, Isla nestled on her chest. Ash lay at her feet, one ear cocked toward the creek, the other attuned to the infant's pulse. Grace felt the cabin hum with a new certainty. They were not a conventional family, nor bound by blood or law. They were bound by imprint, by the invisible ink of survival and second chances. She stoked the hearth, adding a split of fur. Flames caught, throwing light across beams that once heard only echo. As sparks clambered up the flue, Grace whispered a vow to the orange glow. We will guard what you guard. We will listen for cries beneath the wind. Behind her, Ash let out a breath long held, a soft thrum of contentment. He rested his chin on his paws, eyes drifting shut, knowing the legacy he carried had found a home willing to shoulder its weight. Outside, the rain eased, leaving the world rinsed and ready. Inside, purpose settled like warm embers, ready to burn steady through whatever nights might come. The first blush of April colored the slopes outside Sable Ridge, meadow grass and moss daring through the receding snow. At the edge of a quiet clearing stood a lone ponderosa pine, its silhouette resolute against the sky. Beneath it, Mayor Shelley Pratt stood on a milk crate, a hammer tucked into her belt. A small group had gathered, not a crowd, but a circle. Firefighters in dress blues, ranchers with hay-dusted hats, library patrons shielding their eyes with paperbacks. Grace arrived with Natalie and baby Isla wrapped snugly against her chest. Beside them walked Ash, no longer in harness, but present as an honored guest. His movement held the quiet geometry of purpose, ears twitching, eyes scanning the tree line. Near the pine, Ivy leaned on her cane and pressed a polished cedar plaque into a carved notch. Its single brass line read, "For the one who remembered." No name, no date. Just space for silence to speak. Mayor Pratt met Grace's gaze, then Ash's, then the town's. Still no words. Then Widow Barnes, once the choir's voice, began an old Appalachian lullaby. Her voice, rough with age, trembled like leaves in a breeze. Hush-a-bye, my little darling. Sleep until the morning light. Ivy joined in low alto, then Captain Bram. Soon, every voice, brave enough to try, swelled the fragile melody. The sound wrapped around them like a shawl. Grace felt something shift in her chest. Ribs, once sealed by grief, now quietly opening. She looked at Ash, ears down, nose lifted to take in the song. Natalie hummed to Isla, tears trembling but not falling. When the last note faded, silence bloomed. Isla let out a soft babble. Before Natalie could soothe her, Ash stepped forward and touched his nose to the quilt. A hush fell over the circle. Wonder more than surprise. Mayor Pratt's voice followed, barely more than breath. Some heroes carve marble. Some leave only paw prints in the thaw. Today, we remember one who walked the quiet way. She gestured to the plaque. Let this tree be our witness. Grace knelt, tracing the words on the brass. Your home, she whispered. Ash nudged her shoulder as if to say, you too. The children lingered to pet him, gentle brushes of fingers and soft giggles. Ash stood still, but never stopped glancing toward Isla, tethered to the heartbeat that had reshaped his path. Conversations resumed, library hours, potluck plans, firewood deliveries. Widow Barnes handed Grace a loaf of honey bread with a wink. For late feedings. Decker promised seasoned wood for the guest house, a town knitting itself tighter through kindness. Samuel Wicks stood at the edge, hat in hand. When their eyes met, he tipped his brim, tracks run true, then vanished into the trees. Ivy tapped her cane and stroked Ash's fur. Plaques varnished, but memory lives better in hearts. Grace smiled. Then we'll keep telling the story. Ash settled at the pine's base, sunflecks dancing across his coat, like medals pinned by light. He exhaled, a low rumble of contentment. That evening the cabin's hearth burned low, its glow muted and steady. Outside, a gentle wind stirred the porch's tin bucket, a quiet kind of cold that followed good days. Inside, Grace sat on the rug, cross-legged, her palms cupping a weathered cloth patch. Fire Station 9, Ridge Unit. The stitching had faded, but the thread still held, like memory, like grief. Ash lay beside her, not asleep, but resting in that still way of his. Grace reached for the new collar she'd bought. Look away. You did, his eyes said. She fastened the collar around his neck. The buckle's click sounded like a small prayer. Ash exhaled long and deep, then closed his eyes. Full surrender, quiet knowing. The patch against his throat, like a vow fulfilled. Grace placed her palm over it. She didn't press, she didn't have to. They stayed like that, her still, him breathing, time folding inward. In the next room Isla stirred. Natalie's voice whispered down the hall. Shh, sweetheart, Mama's here. Grace didn't move. Ash didn't wake. Outside, the wind brushed chimes that hadn't rung in months, a soft note, then another, as if the night itself was trying to say, remember this. She whispered, you're not wearing a collar, Ash. You're carrying a promise. He leaned in, pressing his head against her chest, and finally she cried, not grief but release. She wrapped her arms around him, and for the first time since the fire, since the photo in the snow, since the lullaby beneath the pine, they were both still. He wasn't searching anymore, and she wasn't just a witness. They had become keepers of the same flame. Later that night, the nursery glowed soft with hallway light. Snow gathered quietly on the sill, the storm's final breath long spent. On the floor, Grace had placed an old pillow, her father's, still smelling faintly of cedar and smoke, beside the crib. Ash had waited in the hall for days, never intruding, always nearby. But tonight, Grace left the door open, not ajar, open. Ash crossed the threshold. No sound marked his step. He didn't scan the room, didn't brace. He simply walked in and curled beside the crib, body arching to mirror Isla's sleep. His breath slowed, shoulders lowered, presence became peace. Isla stirred, then settled. A sigh, not of fear but comfort. Grace watched from the hallway, her hand on the frame, holding something invisible. Grief, awe, reverence. She didn't speak. She didn't move. Ash breathed in, exhaled out. Again and again, deep, safe, still. And then he slept. Not alert sleep, not dream-haunted sleep, but real sleep, trusting, whole, the kind only possible when darkness has no teeth, when memories no longer burn. No twitches, no starts, no dreams, just peace. Grace, the room. But it was the laughter, pure and bright, that stopped her breath. It came from the nursery. She approached, like stepping toward a deer in a clearing, careful not to startle the fragile magic. Ash was inside. He lay on his side, tail tapping like a soft metronome. Isla stood in the crib, unsteady but radiant, her toothless smile aimed at him, and she was laughing, deep, delighted belly laughs. Ash responded with a dramatic sigh, head thudding to the floor. She squealed, her joy bouncing off the walls. Grace leaned against the doorway, hand over her mouth. She didn't want to break the spell. This wasn't noise. It was resurrection. Natalie appeared behind her, cheeks pink from the breeze. "She's been at it long?" 15 minutes, Grace whispered. Natalie smiled. Ash does that. He invites peace just by being. Isla stumbled back onto her bottom and looked to Ash, not for help, but for confirmation. "Did you see that?" He blinked. She laughed again. Outside, the world softened. Icicles dropped like commas. Laughter replaced snow pants. Sable Ridge was stretching awake. Grace stepped in, scratched Ash behind the ear. "We made it, haven't we?" He nudged her knee, then turned back to the crib. That evening, wrapped in a blanket, Grace carried Isla to the porch. The sky had turned a forgiving blue. Ash lay at her feet, blocking the breeze. "She's laughing now," Grace said softly, "and I think you remembered how." Ash didn't move, but his breath, slower now, told her everything. They sat there, a woman, a child, and a dog who once carried fire in his bones. Spring hadn't just come outside, it had arrived in this house, too. Morning arrived gently. The cabin exhaled sleep, steam curled from the kettle. Grace stood at the sink, sleeves rolled. She looked toward the nursery. The door was ajar. She could see the crib, and just beside it, the rise and fall of Ash's back. Still, present. Not guarding. Belonging. A knock at the door. Ben stood outside, balancing coffee and breakfast sandwiches. "I come bearing bacon," he grinned. Grace smiled and let him in. "You didn't have to. After everything lately, least I could do." They sat at the table, the wood worn smooth by time and conversation. "She asleep?" Ben asked. Grace nodded. "Dreaming, I think." "Isla?" She shook her head. "Ash." They looked toward the nursery. Through the doorway, Ash, eyes closed, breathing steady, softer somehow, settled. Ben tilted in. Grace said, "And I have stopped needing the answer." He nodded. "Some things don't come with proof." "No," she said, "just presence." A pause. "The county still asking about custody?" Grace smiled faintly. "Wanted to release him to a shelter." Ben froze. "I said no," she added. "Said he already has a job, one he gave himself." Ben stared at her. "You're more than a witness, Grace." She didn't answer, but her breath deepened. "Maybe." From the nursery came a soft thud. Grace rose and opened the door fully. Ash blinked up at her. He didn't rise. Isla slept, fingers resting in his fur. She knelt beside them, hand on his neck. "You don't have to ask," she said. "This is yours." Ash closed his eyes, not out of exhaustion, but safety. Evening stretched over Sable Ridge like a shawl. On the porch, 4 old chairs held Grace, Ben, Natalie, and Ivy. They sat quietly, eyes watching the yard. Isla toddled barefoot through the grass, her laughter trailing like wind chimes. Ash followed, not guarding, not trailing, just keeping pace. Like a memory that refused to fade, Natalie spoke softly. "He hasn't left her side, not once." Ben chuckled. "Dogs got better hours than I do." Ash flicked his tail as if in agreement. Grace watched them. "He's slower now, but not unsure." "No," Ivy said, "just deliberate." Isla plucked a dandelion gone to seed and offered it to Ash. He sneezed. She collapsed in laughter. Natalie's voice shook. "I keep thinking I'll wake up. A crash, a blizzard, a ghost dog." Ben reached over and squeezed her hand. Grace said, "Maybe we were asleep. Maybe he's the one who remembered how to keep looking." Ivy nodded. "Grief can numb instinct, but not his." They watched in silence. Isla curled beside Ash, her fingers tangled in his fur like roots. Ben murmured, "You think it was an accident, him finding her?" Grace shook her head. She needed him, and maybe he needed someone small enough to believe he was still good. Ivy's voice was almost lost to the wind. "They always find their way to each other." Natalie whispered, "I don't know how to thank him." "You already did," Grace said, "every time you hold her." The porch held them like a lullaby, soft, familiar, full of memory. Out in the yard, Ash lifted his head, counted the faces watching, then lowered it again. Back beside the child he had chosen. Back where he belonged. The kitchen smelled faintly of rising. She held the pen for a long time. Words were her craft, but this wasn't about craft, it was about truth. To the crew at Fire Station 9, "You don't know me, but I know him." Her hand trembled, but not from the cold. Out the window, birch trees swayed and a woodpecker tapped rhythmically on the bark, counting time, it seemed. "His name is Ash, you knew that, of course. But maybe you didn't know he's still working. He found a child in the forest, a baby, no footprints, no sounds. Just wind, snow, and the kind of silence only he could hear through." Grace paused and heard Tyler's voice in her memory. "Don't overwrite the truth, just speak it gently." "You carried her, kept her warm, waited." And when we arrived, he didn't run. You stayed. Ash was more than a stray. Grace had thought otherwise at first, but now she knew. He never forgot who he was. You trained him to hear what others missed, to search for what shouldn't be lost, and when we forgot how to listen, Ash remembered. The fire in the stove had faded to embers. Grace stared at it, her chest heavy and still. There's a girl here now. Isla. She's safe because of him. I don't know if you believe in legacy or ghosts or grace with a lowercase g, but I've seen all three. She signed the bottom softly, Dr. Grace Ellery, Sable Ridge Clinic. Then she sealed the envelope and set it where the sunlight just touched the edge of the table. That afternoon she walked it down to the little red mailbox at the corner. When she dropped the letter in, it wasn't a message. It was a promise. The light filtered gently through the cabin windows like fingertips remembering a song. Inside, Isla sat on a rug, babbling to herself beside a stack of blocks. Natalie read softly from a book, her eyes flickering between the pages and the little girl. Ash lay nearby, one ear perked, and Isla stood. There was no dramatic moment, no shout, just a quiet, instinctive rising, as if she was always meant to. One step, but tremble another. Ash lifted his head. He didn't rush to her, he simply moved beside her, calmly, faithfully. She stumbled and sat with a surprised little thump. Her bottom lip trembled, then curved into a smile. Ash sat beside her, tail thumping once. He nudged her shoulder with his nose. Isla giggled and pressed her forehead to his. Natalie whispered through tears. She walked. Grace only nodded. Yes, she did. Later they watched it on Grace's phone, a shaky video, no audio except the hush of the stove and a soft inhale. It ended just before Isla laughed, and that felt right. That night, with Isla asleep and firelight flickering low, Grace sat on the porch replaying the clip, not because she needed it to remember, just to honor it once more. Inside, Ash had curled up beside Isla's crib, but this time his breathing was slower, not vigilant, peaceful. Grace whispered into the night, "You waited for her to stand, just so you could walk with her." "No, no," answer came, except for a gentle thump of Ash's tail across the floorboards. As spring leaned into dusk, golden light spilled across the yard like honey. Out beyond the porch, near the old willow scarred by lightning, Ash lay in the grass, still, calm, not guarding or seeking, just being. Grace stood wrapped in the sweater, watching. Ben stood beside her, saying nothing. There was nothing to say. Ash shifted slightly, lowered his head onto his paws, his breathing steady. He wasn't asleep, just listening, just present. "There are dogs who stop when the orders end," Ivy had once said. "And there are the others, the ones who wait, for the next soul to need them." Ash was the latter, always had been. Natalie appeared with Isla asleep in her arms, one tiny hand gripping a piece of dried grass. She looked at Ash, and for the first time in months, her eyes held peace. Ash didn't move, didn't need to. Grace stepped off the porch and walked across the lawn toward him. The grass barely rustled beneath her. She didn't call his name. She didn't have to. When she sat beside him, cross-legged, Ash opened one eye slowly. "Still on duty?" she asked softly. He blinked, then closed his eye again. She reached into her jacket and unfolded a worn note. Tyler's handwriting. Ivy had found it, tucked inside a book. "He doesn't just respond to commands. He listens for need. If I'm ever gone, tell whoever finds him. He's not waiting to be owned. He's waiting to be understood. Grace looked down at Ash. "You found her," she whispered. "And you stayed." Ash's tail moved once against the grass. It wasn't thanks he needed, just space. When the stars appeared, no one called him inside. The porch light came on, gentle, not demanding. Ash stayed in the grass. Not alone, not forgotten. Just still. The old shepherd beneath the fading sky. Still working. Still waiting. And in the morning, when Isla ran barefoot through the dew, she would find him there. Head lifting, body rising, not to protect, not to lead, just to walk beside her. The one who remembered. Sometimes, what stays with us the longest isn't the loudest moment, but the quiet presence that never left. No act now, just something worth exploring, if your heart is still quietly listening.